I've been kind of popping in on your social media, enjoying all your wisdom that you've been sharing. And so I think it's wonderful that you've written this book called Unfinished Business, which I
Mhm.
just love. Tell me, what made you decide to take pen to paper and create this guide that is going to be of extremely great help to a lot of people, in my opinion.
It's funny. When I started writing this book, it was during the pandemic.
Right.
Of course, the most traumatizing time to this country in a century, right? And I had been doing this work for so many years, probably over 20 years, getting closer to 30 maybe. And so many of my clients were saying to me, when are you going to make it more accessible? Because there's only one of me, so I can work so many hours a day and doing this work with people. And I had done webinars, and I was lying on my couch with COVID. I actually had COVID, and I thought maybe I'll write a book. And that's really where it started. So I took the workbook from the webinar that I had been leading, and that's really where it started, was from that, and then it progressed from there.
The book is, it feels like it's also uh, part memoir because you bring so much of yourself. Sometimes I'll read a self help book and I won't really know anything about the person who wrote it beyond a short bio. But you have opened up so much of your life and loss, um, that why was it important for you to do that? Did you feel that people would be able to relate more to what you were having to say, knowing that you've gone through hardships?
Well, I think it may be twofold or even maybe trifold. I, as a person, am a shoulder to shoulder walker, right? I don't like walking ahead of anyone or behind.
Oh,
I will sit at someone's feet to learn, but on the path of our journeys, I'm a shoulder to shoulder. I like to know we're together. Also, I do feel that in my life, if I'm going to take on a guide per se, I want to know they've been up the mountain. Right? Like if they don't know more than I know, probably not taking the trip with them, right? But also it is a softening of our relationship so that I'm not held at a distance,
right.
right? Especially because a lot of people know who I am in a particular way, but who I truly am is exactly like everybody else. And I want everyone else to know that my life has been filled with heartache. And I am here to be a model and a beacon for the fact that everyone can get to the other side of heartbreak and trauma and loss and grief. I'm one of the happiest people you'll ever meet. So the fact that I sit here isn't a miracle, it's a skill.
Right.
Yeah.
That, that's very well put. And I'm gonna I may pronounce this name wrong. Is it Gabor Mate
Gabor Mate, yeah.
or Mate? I got the Mate right. Um, and you quoted Mate as saying, the greatest damage done by neglect, trauma, or emotional loss is not the immediate pain they inflict, but the long-term distortions they induce in the way a developing child will continue to interpret the world and her situation in it.
Yes. Yeah.
That explains so much of when you meet someone, you may observe that they're behaving a certain way and you think, wow, that's a little intense. And then if you get to know them and find out what they've gone through, you think, wow, that's not intense enough. Um,
Right.
how did you come upon how did you do your research for quotes like this, and and then mixing in your own observations and interpretations?
So Gabor studied with the same teachers I did,
Okay.
right? So Bessel and Peter and the research was for me an internal journey and an external journey. So as I had internal hunches from it, my own experience, for example, I felt very, very differently when my mother died than when my sister died, for example. Just a little bit of background. My mother died of cancer when I was 28. And my sister was killed shortly after that in a car crash. And why I remember the moment where I thought, like, why does this feel different? Right? Why, though they were both tremendous losses, my sister was a tragedy, my mother was a heartbreak, right? So my sister was a trauma and my mother's was traumatic. So that's a bit different. There was actually a trauma to my sister's. I was with my mother, and though it was traumatic and it was a bit of a gruesome death, it wasn't a trauma, an acute moment in, right? It was a slow burn of a trauma. And I talk about acute and chronic, et cetera, in the book, complex trauma. Um, but when I started noticing the internal experience, I started every single time something like that awakened in me, I would do the research to find the science, even to the point where I would go back to school and study with these teachers. I would go to the institutes that they led. I would go to the courses they taught. I would go to the universities where they taught. Some of my teachers, such as Dr. Anadea Judith, I apprenticed with her. I traveled with her. I assisted her. I wanted to be so deeply immersed in the work. And then, of course, as I opened my own wellness center, I brought the experts to me and then spent glorious amounts of time with them to really parse out the data that I wanted to understand on a deeper level.
Um, from our earliest memories in grammar school, we'll know kids who come from very traditional families. I remember the big thing, well, not one, the big thing, but one thing people would talk about, we would compare notes. How many grandparents do you have? And some would have all four, and some would have two, three, one, none. And it was always interesting to see kids who had, by appearances, a more traditional um, family that had not been touched by significant tragedy or trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were others who did. And there's a passage in the book that I believe you wrote that said, when a child suffers great trauma early in their life, a crack opens in the universe and connects them to a deeper part of their being.
Yes.
And that is so powerful because some young kids in grammar school, when they go through a trauma, they have to age quickly. It's not really the same as other kids who are just kind of going la 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 la, um a- appearingly so. I'm not saying it in every case. You don't always know. But can you talk about trauma at a young age and how the book helps them deal with, and it's a great title, unfinished business. It's also a workbook too.
Yes, yes, it is. And I do want to mention when you go to the actual homework and the work that you do, there are downloads that I had designed. In the book, they did not put the full address. So when you look at the address for the downloadables, remove the slash and add the .com, and you will actually get to the site where you can have the free downloadables. Okay, I do want to say something there. When you're a child who experiences trauma, you don't have the luxury to collapse into the why me the same way, right? Like children that don't have large traumas can sort of fall into like little, more of a gentle tantrum of a reaction to life when things don't go their way.
Right.
When we're dealing with more severe trauma, the traumatized child, if lucky, if they do not dissociate, that crack in the universe brings us to the question of why me? Not just why me, but why me? It's almost a feeling of chosenness in a curriculum. Like, I had so much trauma in my life, right? I had major surgery when I was a baby. I saw my mother have her first stroke when I was 5. I saw and found my mother after she had her second stroke when I was 11. I got her to the hospital. She had 2 bouts of cancer. My father had a series of strokes where he went partially blind and deaf. Then my mother had the cancer that she ultimately died from, and then my sister was killed, and then my other sister died, and then my father died, and I went through my own series of traumas in my life around divorce and leaving careers and so on and so forth. That to me can't be a quinky dink, right? Like, I am in training for something. This is a journey towards wisdom. Or as I say in the opening poem, these are stones on my path. And my father used to say all the time, "Oh, Melanie, nothing ever goes to waste," right? And even heartbreak, when used well, goes towards meaning, not to waste. Yeah.
Right. But it's so hard to move forward and get to that point when you're going through whatever has happened.
100%. And the reason, Michael, is because the body is truly feeling something. And the point of it is not to think your way out. You see, we create a duality in ourselves by bifurcating. Our body, let's say, is in a place of sorrow or pain or loss or rage, even. When we try to talk ourselves out of our biological, physiological response to this, we actually feel completely abandoned. The point of this work is to teach you how to know exactly who you are, why your reactivity is as it is, and how to manage it through being able to go into the feeling of it and understand what it means. And then start to allow the charge to release from the body, which, by the way, in Dr. Peter Levine's work, another one of my teachers, he studied animals and their traumatic experiences. And why don't they walk around traumatized? Because they complete the charge. They allow it to exit the body. Because of our triune brain, we do not do that. We bypass it. We shut it down. And then we tamp it until we're filled with the negative energy that gets trapped in the muscle and the body. Yeah. So learning to be in what you truly are feeling and not intellectualizing it. It's hard because the first thing we learn is how not to feel the bad stuff.
Right.
But who named it bad? It doesn't feel as fun as the good stuff, but it is still charge, and it is still the information that reminds us that we're alive and human.
I think there are different generations and eras where society encourages more self-care and seeking help. I don't recall the 70s were a time for uh, dealing with a lot of feelings necessarily. Maybe the self-help books came along more in the 80s. I could be wrong on this. But why do you feel that there are different times in society where it's the prevailing method seems to be, oh, just don't talk about it. But now, fortunately, we're living in an era where great books like this exist.
Well, I do believe that shame is the fundamental reason for all of those you know, so many things. Let's think about a time that our youth here in the world today don't even remember when certain things were illegal. It was illegal to be a homosexual. I mean, that's insane. Okay, it's insane what we have imposed on our existence. And so when we think about the fact that I just wrote a piece for a magazine about the new face of wellness. And when I was growing up, I'm a depression, the child of depression era parents.
Yep.
And when we were growing up, let's think about, like, we were given Wonder Bread with like sweet and low and margarine, and because they didn't know better.
Right.
And at that same time, if anything was ailing, you didn't talk about it because it meant there was something wrong with you. Now, if we look way back, all the women who took laudanum and all these drugs to get rid of their nervous disorders and so on and so forth, right? We were dealing with mental illness, right? We were dealing with profound levels of anxiety and sorrow and heartbreak and trauma and shame. But what we did was we numbed and deadened it. Now we're in a culture where soulful warriors stepped forward and said, no, I won't accept it. I want to love who I want to love. I want to feel what I want to feel. I want to heal so that I can figure this out. I don't want to follow the paradigm of suffer, 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 then retire
Mm-hmm.
so that you can regret your life, but at least you'll have a little money in the bank so that you can go to the shore, right? So you know, it's funny, there's this wonderful story about the two men on the beach at sunset. And the one man says to the other, isn't it incredible? We've worked, they're drinking the Mai Tais, you know, we've worked so hard through our lives. 60 years I worked to be able to sit here in this chair at this sunset. Isn't it incredible? We just had to sacrifice and we finally got here. And the man next to him said, actually, I own the surfboard stand over there, and those are my kids in the water. This was my life. Right? So we can choose to believe that suffering is required for our own personal bliss, or we could just choose the bliss, right? We could choose a different way of life aligned with our soul. And that is truly what this book is for. If you are struggling on any level, you don't know what you need to know about yourself. Don't look out there. Look in here. Everybody, and I, you know, all these spellcasters out there in the world right now, selling this and selling that. Don't look at that. Look at you. Figure out how you want to live, who you want to love, what you want to stand for. What are your values and virtues? What is the memory of your original self? Then you draw your map from that place, not from something that has been imposed on you. From anyone, right? And that's what this book is truly about. Finish the unfinished business, heal the sorrow of yesterday, stand in your power in the moment, and design the life of your dreams. That is what this book is about, period.
How did the title come to you?
Well, when I started going into the world of coaching, my first training was in the Gestalt method and Fritz Perls. And in the Gestalt method, unfinished business is critical to finish, right? We want things to be complete. We want to go back to ground. Because in the ground figure theory, what we focus on comes from what has occurred internally, right? You've seen those, even a Rorschach test, right? Where like, oh, I see a woman's hat, or like, oh, I see a fire breathing dragon, right? That comes from the way you interpret the world. What the figures are that you see in the world are from your interpretation, right?
Yes.
We want to come back to neutral ground. We want to be able to see what is really pure in front of us and what potential lies there for us. Not being marred by the past, or as I like to say, our mirrors are so muddied now from everybody else's perspective. How do we start stepping in as the true self so that we can make choices from exactly who we are? I love Cal Newport's work where he talks about deep work and the spirit of the craftsman. You know, we're no longer craftsmen. We've come out of the ability to really create from ourselves and you know, move into things that everybody else thinks that we need to be good at. But the craftsman, we find the things that we love and the tools we have, and we build what we in our soul want to create in front of us. That is truly the way of a healthy soul, is to make a choice from what lights you up. Not what someone sells you is the right direction.
How much of work that people can do to deal with their unfinished business is physical?
So physical meaning like jumping jacks, or physical meaning physiological?
I I guess both, but let me start with like because like personally, I found yoga rather late in life, and I think it's terrific. I think everyone should be doing it. You become like a real champion of it when you realize how much better you feel after doing a couple of downward dogs.
Well, it's funny, in the practice of yoga, there is this work you do in the sub scarring, right? And Mr. Iyengar, one of my teachers, used to say, yoga done out of alignment is a physical practice. Yoga done in alignment is a spiritual practice. So when we create heat in the practice of yoga, what we're really attempting to do is to burn away the old samskara, that scarring of our history. So there's a physiological aspect to it that only adds to the emotional, energetic, intellectual part of it. We are one, we're a unit. You know, we've been so trained to think from here up, to live from here up. But look at this, right? I know the head, what does it weigh, 50 pounds? But I know my body weighs more than that. So, right? There is so much data in our cellular structure that it makes sense that using your physiology to open yourself will only aid in healing and growing and knowing. So yoga has been my practice, my love, my spirit dance for, oh my God, I'm 60 now. So probably, 40 years. Yeah.
It's an interesting decade.
It's an interesting decade. It's an interesting decade, right? Because we're in a world right now where I'll go back to the spellcasters, right? Where so much fear is being sold, and so much around money and quick fixes and life hacks, and going back to being human in our experience of our body and our soul and each other and connection, right? We have to take charge of that now. No one's going to give us or sell us that. It doesn't monetize, right?
Right.
So it's up to us to do our own searching and healing, and really the depth of love that comes from this kind of work, love of others, love of ourselves, love of giving, love of our work. That's a life of bliss.
When you are out and about, now that the world has opened up a little bit more from the last couple of years, uh, what roles are you recognized for the most?
Always Seinfeld.
Sure.
And I get more of, who you sort of look like, because I wasn't blonde back in the day, right? I was a heavy duty brunette, right? I don't know how this happened all of a sudden. No. But so many people will go, you look really familiar to me, or I feel like I know you, or, but always Seinfeld. People always know Seinfeld. There are my daytime fans that I just love, right? Daytime fans are very special. They're very, very special. By the way, The fascinating thing about the daytime community, the soap community, is that we spent, because I was a huge soap fan, right? I miss the genre.
Oh,
Um, we watched traumatized people.
yeah.
There was so much unfinished business in Oakdale, right? Like,
Kind of ask you which top three characters do you think would have benefited the most from unfinished business? I'll give you my three:
let me
Lucinda
hear.
Walsh,
Mm-hmm.
Ida Snyder,
Yes.
well, maybe John Dixon or Tonio. I don't know, but a lot of people would have benefited from this. How might Emily have benefited from unfinished business?
First of all, let me just say, numero uno is James Stenbeck.
Oh well, yes, yes,
James
yes, of
Stenbeck
course.
needed a shipment of these books, right? And Emily, of course, my God, Emily was so heartbroken,
Yeah,
right? She was so desperate for love.
she had that mother.
She had that mother, she had that father, you know, she was abandoned. And so she sought love around every dark corner, right? So for sure, Emily and Susan,
Yeah,
Susan needed this work. I
sure.
mean, um, uh, uh, let's just say everybody needed it. Paul,
Yep.
Barbara.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, Lucinda, Lily. I mean, everybody, the whole Snyder family. I mean, like everybody. Um, uh, oh my God, Billy Fichtner. What was the character's name?
Rod Josh. Yeah. Rod.
Right?
Yeah. I was just thinking of that when you said it.
Yeah.
Um, can I ask you for our As World Turns fans who fondly remember you at a time when the show's writing by Douglas Marland was at its peak? He is widely considered the best writer of the genre. Um, I have to ask you, when Anthony Herrera, James Stenbeck was strangling Emily just before Paul shot him, it looked like you were off the ground. And
I was.
from a stunt perspective, how do you do that? Do you hang on to his wrists and keep
Yes,
pressure away from the actual neck?
exactly.
There must have been a great deal of trust to do a stunt like that with someone.
Well, and let me tell you, we did have an extra in that scene that kept forgetting their lines. So we ended up doing that scene so many times.
Wow.
It was probably one of the most exhausting, meaningful, but exhausting. I mean, we had so many issues. There were some tech issues, there were some extra, you know, there were things that, and not even extras. I think he was a day player because they obviously had a line. So
Right.
um but yeah, it was, you know, your body doesn't know that it's acting.
Right. Right.
Right? It thinks it's really being traumatized. But yes, you hold on so that the lift is, you have control over the lift. That is how it's done.
And I recall, there's a time now, like Julianne Moore came back for uh, a guest appearance in the show's last several months because she knew it was going off and wanted to honor her time there. And,
Yeah.
and that wasn't always done. Um, I remember, believe it was after you had left the show, but then they wrote in um, your character's grandfather's death, David, played by Henderson Forsyth, and you came back for those episodes. I don't think that was done as often as it later became done. So it must have been a very special time and role and show and people for you.
Oh my God. You know, the beauty of World Turns was we had, I believe, one of the most proficient casts on all of daytime because our cast, there were so many there were so many true thespians in our cast. And you were not just grateful for the work, you were grateful for the training. These were our greatest teachers, no matter where you studied.
Right.
To be opposite these Tony Award nominees and Tony Award winners,
Yeah.
really, who gets to do that, especially when you're a punk?
Well, I never saw Punk.
Well, we were punks. Like we were just little twerps that came in polished from a school and not knowing anything real. And then you got to suit up to like show up all the time for these pros. And, you know, you don't show up on a set like World Turns late, not knowing your lines, not knowing your mark, not having your hair and wardrobe ready. You do not show up with that team without getting chewed up. It is not acceptable.
Was there a particular cast member who impressed that upon you and the other young cast members at the time? Do you recall?
Everyone, because if you were ever late, if you ever had a moment of entitlement and you walked on set, the vibe was so unaccepted. It was never show up like that again. I remember a number of times a couple of kids came onto set, you know, kind of young. Yeah, I got a TV show. I'm like, woo, you're right. Like I made it. I'm a big star now. And they held us up. Now there were groups that were considered the A team, where like if we did run long because somebody was forgetting their lines or not ready on time or so on and so forth, they would bump the A team to the end of the day so we could make up time. I had to do 4 scenes, 4 costume changes once in 45 minutes.
Wow.
Because we had lost time during the day. But I do attribute the level of excellence on that show and the level of professionalism on that show to who I became as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
I was young, you know, I was young. I mean, I had high pressured positions before. I was a choreographer. So I worked with under a lot of pressure for some traveling companies. But being on that show, it really taught me who I could be. It gave me tremendous confidence in my potential.
What is the takeaway you would like people to have from reading Unfinished Business?
I think the most important thing for anyone seeking to have their highest potential life is to know that it's possible, to feel the energetic shift in the body as things start to heal. It's like, you know, and I use this example a lot. When we learn to walk as children, we fall down thousands of times.
Right.
Now, are any of us still laying on the ground? Right? We've all gotten up and just attempted and attempted and attempted. Why? Because we know what we were going for. We knew it. We knew there was something. We could feel it in our core. The takeaway from this book for me is for you to start to tap into knowing what you're going for. And then to never, ever stop working towards it. This book is a workbook that is 8 steps to heal your trauma, to transcend the past and transform your future. But it is a book I want you to keep torn and ragged in your bag. Because every time, listen, once you heal the heartache of the past, doesn't mean you're not going into the battlefield again.
Right.
Right? Someone will break your heart again, right? Whether it's just the years where people you love leave, where you lose your beauty or you lose. So I fell down my steps, God, 12 years ago, and I tore my rotator cuff. So my yoga practice as an advanced yoga practitioner had to change. That was a loss for me, right? That was something I had to investigate. How do I still use that part of myself? Because that just wasn't a physical modality in my life. I was a teacher of it. So how did I shift those? Well, I did my work on me. I always make a joke. I say, if I lose a nail, I do the work. Right? The takeaway is this: healing is possible over and over and over again. Just do the work.
That's
and
fantastic.
there's a guidebook in your hand.
Melanie Smith, I want to thank you so much for coming on with Soap Hub and talking about Unfinished Business. You can go to Amazon now and check out the book.
Yes, and you can also go to unfinishedbusinessthebook.com and order it from any of the major booksellers there. It will be in bookstores as well, but so easy to just get it from Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or you can even go to, like I said, unfinishedbusinessthebook.com and order it off the site too.
We will include these links in our story, and I want to thank you so much for coming on. Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much for having me and for all that you do. And if anybody wants to reach out, you can also go to workwithmelaniesmith.com and find me there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.